All right, welcome everybody. Glad to be here. Today's talk is going to be on guiding your team to technical excellence. My name is Fadi Stephan, and I am an Agile coach and trainer helping organizations transform, innovate, and deliver impactful products. My contact info is right there. I'd love it if we connect, and maybe we can continue the conversation from today's talk afterwards. But enough about me, let's get started. So I'm going to kick things off with a bit of a story here in terms of different stages of, if you want to call it maturity, that I typically run into when I'm helping organizations. And the setup is they call me up and they say, "Hey, Fadi, we've been doing Scrum for a while now, but we're not seeing the benefits we were expecting. Can you come in and help us out?" So I come in and I basically see that the team is working in sprints and they have 2-week sprints. And that's pretty impressive when you're first starting. Getting to 2-week sprints is not that easy. But then when I look a bit further, I observe that, the way they're working is in sprint 1, they're doing requirements. In sprint 2, they're doing design. Sprint 3, coding, and sprint 4, testing, right? Obviously, this is not the intent here. And, we go through and explain that in Scrum, within a sprint, we want to be able to do all of these activities together so that we get a working product increment at the end of the sprint. So, what this might be better than what they were doing before, but it still takes a very long time. If this is 2-week sprints, we're talking about 2 months before we can get something out. So this was kind of the phased sprint approach that I run into. I also run into the single sprint approach, where now teams realize, okay, we have to do all of this within a sprint. It's too hard to do in 2 weeks. We'll do it in maybe 30 days, which is fine. But the approach is still the same. We spend the first couple of days doing requirement, the next couple of days doing design, and then most of the sprint doing some coding. And then on the very last day, we try to get everything tested. So again, maybe better than before, but obviously the testers here are not going to be happy. Hey, you can't spend the entire time coding and then let us expect us to finish everything and wrap it up on the last day. And again, this is now, taking about 1 month to get something out. Better than before, but not quite where we want to get to. The next stage is what I see as parallel sprints. All right, here teams understand that we progressively elaborate on our requirements and our designs. So what's left to do is coding. So we can do that in a 2-week sprint, but we can either code or test. We can't do both. So what ends up happening is we do a handoff. We have a coding sprint and a parallel testing sprint going on. So we hand off to another team that does testing while we continue coding. And we hand off to another team that does testing while we continue coding, and so forth. And if we find any errors, that gets handed over to the team in the following sprint. So there's a delay in our feedback. Again, we're looking at maybe a month and a half to maybe wrap things up here. All right. So not quite where we want to get to. Where we want to get to is within a sprint, we want to be finishing things throughout the sprint, not working and trying to wrap things up on the last day, right? And by finishing, I mean, we've coded and we've tested and we know this is a quality item that's ready to go. And we gradually work through our items to reach the end of the sprint, knowing that we are going to have something up and running and working by the end of the sprint because we've been finishing them all throughout the sprints. This is what we mean in Scrum by a product increment, getting to the end of the sprint and having a product increment. it is something that's already been coded, something that's already been tested. And the way we would get there is by breaking up our work and finishing these things throughout the sprint, as opposed to waiting until the very last day to wrap things up. So what I want to kick us off with is a quick warm-up. We're going to go into our breakout sessions. We're just going to have a quick 5-minute discussion to discuss some challenges you might be having in terms of being able to deliver a product increment at the end of every sprint, right? At the end of every sprint, we're supposed to have a quality product increment that should be ready to go. And if you can't, let's chat about that. That's what we're going to talk about in our breakout session. Let's chat about what are some of the challenges that are preventing us from delivering a product increment at the end of every sprint. All right, so we're gonna have a breakout session. We're gonna head out for 5 minutes, then we're gonna come back, we'll debrief, and I'll give you my perspective and how we can improve our practices to be able to do that. All right, so
everybody all ready to go here. So
awesome, let's go.
5 minutes. Hey, Lisa, Mindy, and Michelle, how's it going?
Good evening.
Looks like we've got a bunch of people dropping here because they don't want to participate in breakout sessions, but that's okay. It happens. How are you, Michelle?
Doing very well. I'm at home, so I'm gonna walk outside and I'm gonna sit outside. It's so pretty.
Gotcha, nice. Where are you located that it's so pretty?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
I haven't looked outside all day, so.
Wow.
So we are supposed to be talking about, refresh my memory here. I've already forgotten.
What prevents us from delivering a product increment?
Prevents us
sprint.
from delivering a product increment. So any thoughts on that? Michelle, we'll let you go first since. What things prevent us from delivering a product increment?
Thinking I'm in a position now that they have more of an agile Scrum mindset. So I'm fairly new to being hands-on in this kind of a world, but generally anything that would prevent me from moving forward with the project is my wonderful stakeholders, because they can't seem to make up their minds.
That's a good one. Stakeholders who can't make up their mind, right?
Exactly.
So changing priorities, changing decisions, right? I've got a team that this week we were talking about one, and that what was preventing them from delivering. I'm trying to remember. They have a dependency on another team as part of their definition of done, right? So they aren't allowed to release their products themselves. They have to depend on another team to do it. And we were discussing whether that should be included in their definition of done. And I was kind of like, well, if you can finish a potentially releasable increment, then we'll call it done, and releasing can be outside of your definition of done, right? But they also had a couple of things in their flow, which was like this product owner approval column, right? And that was causing some bottlenecks in their flow. Everything got finished, and then it all went to that last column at the end that was product owner approval, and it sat there and waited. So I don't know if that's one you've seen. Product owner approval, flow, dependency on other teams. Scott, what have you seen recently?
Yeah. Oh, recently?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a couple things came to my mind, and that is, too much whip. You got five developers, and all of them start the same story, start their own story at the beginning of the sprint. And not kind of a focus on, kind of planning and how do we get things through, through our workflow quickly. And then the other thing would just be the distractions. They come out of planning, they take off, and then 2 days later, oh, I got these bugs. Now the product owner comes to them, I need you guys to. So then they pull in, those bugs and start working on those. Just, kind of constant disruptions.
Interrupt driven work, disruptions. Jenny, any that you think of?
Yeah,
Other than
what
those?
product backlog increment? Oh,
What can prevent a team from delivering an increment? Yeah,
slicing, estimating,
that's what I was just thinking. Not slicing
So
their
in the-
story
Too
small
big.
enough, right?
the entire structure of story writing,
Right.
that alone.
That's a big one. Not slicing their story small enough, right? They're
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, we can do this in 2 weeks, and then
skill
dun,
sets
dun,
across teams.
dun.
Teams are always assumed to be cross-functional. They are not. Do you want me to
Right.
keep going? Because I sure can. I did an evaluation of an entire team program in general, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I
Yeah,
haven't
that's a
been
good
on
one
it
too. Siloed
master
roles,
for a long time, and I'm like, it's the same thing. It's the same stuff. Same stuff.
specialized skill sets, and teams that aren't cross-functional and can't.
They always expect the outputs as if the team is cross-functional, where Scrum is set up like, oh, these are cross-functional teams. Well, no, then they usually aren't. But everybody doesn't always allow for that.
Nice. We've got some other people joining. I don't know where they came from.
The breakout rooms are over with, so
We're back in
they're
there.
all all coming back.
Gotcha. Good deal. We have a good list.
It's even resources.
What's that, Michelle?
Even resources. That's kind of the project I'm on now, is how much resources do we have?
All right. Welcome back, everyone. I see Fadi's back, so we'll turn it back over to you, Fadi.
Thank you. All right, welcome back. Let's fire up the chat, and if we can just type up some of the answers we came up with. I was in one group. I heard some of the discussions, but let's see what the other groups had. So if we can type up some thoughts in the chat, right? Stories are too big, right? Well, I heard that as well, talking about refinement. What else do we have out there? Dependencies, right? We're dealing with a lot of dependencies, either on other items or other teams. Absolutely. Teams being optimistic, difficulties with estimation, too much work in progress, manual work, right? Manual sanity checks. Not respecting sprint boundaries, maybe rolling things over from sprint to sprints. Testers not being engaged from the very beginning, absolutely. All right, oh, look at that. Stakeholders changing their minds. That never happens, come on. No automation, yeah, no automation. All right, cool. Let's, I think we have a good list going. Let's head back, or I need to share my screen again. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Yes. All right. Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So let's dig a bit deeper. I'm gonna share with you my perspective. The very first one is really a misunderstanding of what a product increment is. All right. A lot of teams transition to Scrum, but the way we approach work stays the same. And I'll elaborate a bit about that. We have a sprint and we deliver a widget. Let's call it A here. And many teams would refer to that as the product increment. That is the output of the sprint. And then we move on to another sprint and we would deliver B. We would move on to another sprint, we would deliver C. Then eventually we would have a sprint where we're going to put all of this together. All right. Now, in Scrum, a product increment is everything we previously delivered plus something new, which is the increments, right? And this is what we mean by building things iteratively and incrementally. It means we are going over what we've already delivered plus adding something new to it. It means we go over something again and again and again and add, and add. And that's what the term iterative and incremental means, so that at any point, we always have the latest version of our product up and running. It is not build, 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 then put everything together. It is build and add to what we already have. And that's the notion of how we build stuff iteratively and incrementally, all right? Remember, if you're doing something only once, you're not iterating. And if you don't add to what you already have, you are not incrementing, okay? So one key problem is kind of a misunderstanding of what does it mean to build stuff iteratively and incrementally, and what does it mean to have a product increment? Now, associated with that is a lack of skills. A lack of skills of working in this way, all right? This is very different than how we are traditionally used to working, and it's not something we learn in school. So we need to acquire these skills, and we generally don't invest in learning this new way of working. And you know, there's two reasons for that. One is from a leadership perspective, there's a reluctance to send the entire team to training. They'll be like, I can send a Scrum Master to training, I can send the product owner to training, that's just one person. But to send the entire team for training, that's a big hit. And understandably so, because there's going to be a long period of time where no work is getting done. And that feeds into a programmer's interests, all right? I'm a technologist, and I'm much more interested in learning about the latest tech than about a different way of working. So if I am going to get the opportunity to go to training, maybe not with the entire team, but on my own, I would much rather learn about mobile development, cloud development, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I would much rather learn about that than about a new or different way of working. So
I feel like you're giving my biography right now.
Well, there you go. Right? These two end up feeding into each other, and we end up not investing properly in learning how to build stuff iteratively and incrementally. All right. The other aspect is obviously siloed roles. All right. On a Scrum team, we are supposed to have a cross-functional team that's supposed to take an idea from conception all the way to production without handoffs. That one team consists of all of the skill sets needed to be able to deliver something. It's not I'll work on something and then hand it over to somebody else, and they'll work on it and hand it over to somebody else until we have something that is workable. So we don't structure our teams in a way that supports that has all of these skill sets, and we end up having handoffs from one team to another team, or handoffs within the team from one team member to the other. And this creates bottlenecks and kind of sub-optimization, because now we are ordering our product backlog based on who's available, so that we can keep everybody busy, as opposed to what is really high priority. All right, we start dealing with these sub-optimizations based on who's available. All right, now another issue here is that quality is an afterthought. Again, we're still in our traditional approach of build first and check for quality later, right? We have to transition into building quality in and shifting testing to the left. There shouldn't be any phases. It should not be coding and then testing. All right. From the beginning, we should be building a quality product. All right. It is not once we're done, let's check to make sure something is of quality. So that mindset, again, does not change. People transition to Scrum, but keep their old ways of working and their old ways of thinking. And finally, again, we saw that in the chat as well, there's a lack of automation. Whether it's test automation, build automation, deployment automation, the lack of automation makes a lot of testing cycles very long and deployments very fragile and painful. All right. Now, to help us with all of this, there are agile engineering practices that make all of this a lot easier. Right. The first one is test-driven development. Right. Test-driven development is a key practice that helps us build stuff iteratively and incrementally. With test-driven development, we're thinking about the problem that we're about to solve, and we start by writing a test, and a small, very small automated test about what we're about to do. This test is going to fail because we haven't written any code yet, right? So before we write any code, we're writing a very, very small test about what we're about to do, and it's red because it's failing. Then we write a very small piece of code to make that test pass. Now that the code is passing, we spend the bulk of our time in a step called refactoring. Refactoring here means cleaning up our code, right? Cleaning up our code, making it better, improving the algorithm, so that we are building on a solid foundation. While we're cleaning up the code, while we're improving it, we keep rerunning the test to ensure that it's still passing. So this gives us the confidence to make changes, knowing that we didn't break anything. And then we would move on and write the next test, again, very small piece of test, and write some code, clean it up, always ensuring that as the code is growing, we are always building on a solid foundation, right? So this kind of builds in that skill of breaking up our work into very, very, very small pieces and building them piece by piece. All right. In the discussion I heard, we're having a hard time breaking up our stories into manageable pieces. This technique makes that kind of natural, right? It becomes a natural way of thinking, a natural way of breaking things up. Now, test-driven development not only helps us with iterative and incremental thinking, but it also helps us with building better quality or shifting testing to the left. Because a side benefit of developing this way is that we will have a suite of tests that we can plug into our continuous integration server and always know that we didn't make any mistakes. Right? So not only are we building better quality because we regularly improve our code base, but also we are now testing throughout. It's no longer build and then test. Now I'm testing throughout. All right? So it's no longer a phase. It's an ongoing activity that I'm doing throughout. All right? So this one practice helps us with the automation problem we talked about, with the quality problem we talked about, and with the iterative and incremental approach we talked about. Next is pairing. All right, pairing is about getting two programmers to sit side by side. One is referred to as the driver, the other one is the navigator. The driver is solving the problem tactically. The navigator is looking at the big picture. The driver is coding and articulating what they're about to do. The navigator is listening and providing feedback. All right. Now, again, this helps us with quality. We have two people working on the same problem, so the result is going to be much higher quality. The algorithm, which will be much stronger. And Any bugs, any mistakes, especially the little stupid mistakes that we all do as programmers, will quickly get discovered because you're getting immediate feedback. You're getting an immediate code review. Now, in addition to better quality, we are gonna have better, we are gonna break down the silos because there's gonna be knowledge sharing. Knowledge sharing in terms of technology and knowledge sharing in terms of domain knowledge. Because we have two people working together, there's an exchange of information, exchange of learning, and that helps our skill levels, helps us get better at our skills. All right, now, next up is ensemble programming or mob programming. This takes pairing and turns the knob all the way up to 11. All right, it's now no longer just two people working together, improving the quality and sharing. Now it's the entire team. The entire team is working together on one problem. All right, direct impact on quality, direct impact on breaking up the silos within our team, and ensuring that we have a better quality product. And more importantly, this will get us closer to what's referred to as collective code ownership. Right? Collective code ownership means everybody on the team owns the code. I no longer depend on one person to do one thing, right? I'm not going to go to Jack for changes in the billing module. I'm not always going to go to Lisa for changing in the accounting module. And then if Lisa's busy, we have to sit and wait. The entire team owns the code, meaning the entire team is capable of going in and making changes in different areas of the application. They're not going to be able to do the heavy lifting, but they're functional. They can go in and make necessary changes. This helps eliminate the bottlenecks. I'm no longer ordering my work based on who's available because I've expanded the knowledge of my team and I can order my work based on what's most important, right? Very, very key practice to have on our team. And the last one is continuous integration and continuous deployment. This is about helping again with the notion of iterative and incremental development, as well as building quality in. We always have the latest version of our product up and running. Every time we make a change, it gets integrated in. We run it through a suite of tests. We know that did not have any impact. We did not introduce any new bugs. And then we deploy the latest version so that it's up and running. This makes our testing cycles a lot shorter. It makes our deployment cycles stronger. It'll eliminate any bugs we introduce by deploying on different machines. We can eliminate the notion of code freezes. And we improve the quality as a whole, right? We're going to improve our quality as a whole. So these practices come from the XP world, extreme programming. And they're nothing new. They've been out there since the late 90s. And right now we are in 2021. So why the pushback? All right, 20 years later, and I still run into a lot of teams that either don't know about these practices or they push back against them. So let's chat about, why the pushback. First, I hear this excuse a lot. We do Scrum, we're not doing XP or extreme programming. Right? We do Scrum, not XP. All right, that's a fair argument. Scrum XP specifically calls out you have to do these practices. They're part of the framework. Scrum has no mention of technical practices. And that's fair and that's true. However, what Scrum says is that at the end of the sprint, you have to have a quality product increment that's ready to be shipped. And if you don't, you're supposed to go into the retrospective and figure out why not, and then add whatever processes or practices you need to be able to get there, right? So Scrum doesn't tell you have to do these things, but if you run software, there's no way you can get to a sustainable development and deliver a product increment every sprint if you are not adopting these practices. The next is TDD is hard, and that's true, right? TDD is difficult at first because it's not natural. In fact, it's counterintuitive, and it takes the way we were working and flips it upside down. And the way most people teach TDD doesn't help because you learn these very basic examples doing little tiny steps that look very different than what programmers deal with on a day-to-day in their production code. So you add to that programmers were just coding and there was somebody else testing, and now we expect them to shift testing to the left, meaning we expect them to deliver a quality product that's already tested. They're going to say, when am I going to have the time to do that? As it is, I'm overwhelmed. There is no time. Right? Pairing is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable both physically and mentally. Right? When we were back in the days where we're in the office, pairing requires you to sit next to somebody, and that person is physically in your personal space. And that can be uncomfortable. At the same time, pairing is mentally draining because you're always on when you're pairing. Meaning there's somebody sitting next to you, so I'm always focused. I'm always working. I'm not gonna check my email, check my Instagram, send somebody a message. There's somebody right there sitting with me, so I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be focused, and that can be tiring. So if pairing is not done properly, it can be extremely uncomfortable. Collective code ownership is practically impossible. I've heard that a lot. I'm having a hard time just learning this particular domain or this particular technology. How am I going to be expected to learn all these other areas of the application? It's just impossible. And then this is the one I hear the least pushback on, which is we already use Jenkins, and Jenkins is a tool to do continuous integration. The problem here is that a lot of people confuse the tool with the practice. All right, it's great that you're using Jenkins. The question, however, is, are you continuously integrating your code base? Meaning, do you integrate multiple times per day, or do you have a lot of branches that are not being integrated? And we integrate only once every 2-3 days, or maybe once every week. The other thing is, do you have automated tests that are going to run every time we integrate? If you don't, you are not getting the benefits that we're supposed to get from a continuous integration server. So let's walk through 8 steps to help make this a reality, or to help level up the technical excellence of our team. Some of the things I'm going to cover are going to be technical, which means you're going to need a technical ally with you to help bring those about. Some of them are not, and as a Scrum Master or as a coach, even if you're not technical, you'll be able to put these in place. So let's run through them. The first one, this is going to be a shameless plug. Obviously, I am a trainer, and I'm going to say you obviously need training. And not just any training, Agile engineering practices training. My classes, 70% of the time, we are doing hands-on coding to expose people to these practices, not by talking about them, but by actually trying them out. Right? So if you're not a programmer, please don't show up to the Agile engineering practices class because we're coding. Now, exposing people to these practices is important, but that's not the point of the training. The most important part is for the programmers to get this aha moment, to understand how this is going to help them. And in my classes, I typically see this on day 2. In day 1, we've been exposed to these practices and techniques, we've tried them out, And on day 2, you know, we were building an app on day 1, and on day 2 we start making changes to this app, and the realization sets in how all of these practices make our lives as programmers easier. How now we have the confidence to go in and make changes without fearing that we're going to break something. And it is this aha moment that's important, because if programmers are not bought in, there's no way there's going to be any change happening, right? Adoption is not going to happen unless you're bought in and know that this is going to help you personally, right? So this is the key benefit that we're trying to get out of here, is that to get that buy-in from the programmers that this is for you to make your environment better. All right, now training on its own obviously is not enough. We need to tie that up with coaching, because change is hard, right? So we have to follow it up with coaching. But before I talk about the next steps we're going to do as coaches and as Scrum Masters, we need to understand how developers spend their time in a sprint. And this is what I typically see. We might send a team to training if we can, which is great. Maybe it's 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. The team is spending most of their focus on the training, and then when they leave training, they come back to work and they're spitting out features. Our 100% focus is on putting out product backlog increments. That's what we're doing. Now, that's just not realistic. It's an unrealistic expectation. And what we have to remember is that developers are going to spend their time on other things besides building the product increment, besides working on the user stories in this sprint. Yes, one aspect is building the product increment. The other aspect is product backlog refinement. We had a chat about this in our breakout session. A big part of the time we're spending during the sprint should be on product backlog refinement, meaning prepping for future sprints, better understanding the requirements for future sprints, better breaking up the work for future sprints. This is key activity that we have to be doing as developers. And if you regularly find yourself reaching the end of the sprint and then rolling things over and then continuing with them, it's likely because we're not spending enough time in product backlog refinements. Now, in addition to product backlog refinements, we have to spend our time on continuous improvement. You know, Scrum is not magically going to solve all your problems. Scrum is going to put a spotlight and shine light to all of your team and organizational dysfunctions. It's not going to solve them. In fact, it's just going to bubble all of the issues you have to the top. Why? Because you have a very short time frame to deliver, and if you can't, it's supposed to be clear as to what the issues are. And then as a team, as an organization, we have to decide, how do we get better? And for us to get better, we have to invest time in getting better. This typically is going to fall in 2 areas: action items from our retrospective, and what we refer to as T-shaped skill sets. Right? T-shaped skill set meaning pairing with other people, learning new skills so that I can help out my teammates where help is needed. Right? I'm expanding my skill sets as a team member. This is a much more realistic breakout of where our developers' time is going to be. Let me see if I can do this here. All right, we go to training, or we're trying to continuously improve, and it doesn't drop down to 0. The blue line is going to gradually go down, and eventually we'll settle down to let's see, it'll settle down around 10 to 15% of our time. Every sprint is going to eventually be around continuous improvement initiatives. The red line is product backlog refinement, and initially our product backlog is going to be in bad shape. So we're going to be spending a lot of time on product backlog refinement, and eventually it'll settle down, but it's not going to go to 0. Again, it's going to be about 10 to 15% of our time prepping for future sprints. And as our product backlog gets in shape, and as our technical practices or our continuous improvement initiatives get in shape, we spend more and more time on building the product increment. That would be our green line. Again, it's not going to get all the way up to 100% because we have to spend time doing product backlog refinement and continuous improvement. So max, we will be at 70 to 80% working on the existing items for the sprint, and we're spending about 30% of our time either on improving or on refinements. Right? This is something very, very common that I see out there, which is the expectation is the team is just spitting out features. That's what they should be doing, and there's not enough focus on the other two areas. All right, so that's the first thing you can do as a coach or a Scrum Master, is to properly set the expectation of what the developer's time or capacity should be across these areas. The next thing, obviously, is the definition of done. Now, there's a lot of confusion between the definition of done and the acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria is something tied to the user story. It helps us understand when this user story is complete, right? And it's going to change from user story to user story because it's based on the requirements. The definition of done is about the quality level that we're going to deliver an item to. And it's typically going to be the same for all product backlog items, for all user stories. This is our agreement as a team to the level of quality that we deliver something. Meaning when I say I'm done with something, what quality checklists did I put in place? All right, now, how would we use this? All right, we would get the team together and we would say, what are all the things we need to do as a team to deliver a product increment? Deliver, right? I want to put this in my customer's hands. Right, and the team will brainstorm and come up with a list. All right, we need to unit test, check the acceptance criteria, maybe do a code review, acceptance tests, and so forth. All right, the team's going to come up with all of these activities that we have to do as a team. This is going to vary by organization. It's going to vary by team. It's going to vary by product. All right, but as long as you make it transparent, this is what our definition of done is. When I say I'm done, I have gone through all of these activities. You're then gonna ask the team, what activities can we do per product backlog item? Meaning when I move something from my task board, from the doing column to the done column, which of these activities can I do for that product backlog item? And the team might say, well, I can do maybe some unit testing. Maybe I can put the code in a repository. I can run a code review, and I can ensure that it meets the acceptance criteria. These other things are too time-consuming, too resource-intensive to be able to do per product backlog item or per user story. And instead, I'm going to wait till the end of the sprint and do them once per sprint for all product backlog items together. All right. And then there are other items that are going to be too time-consuming, too resource-intensive to even do once per sprint. And instead, I'm going to wait several sprints, maybe after every 6 or 8 sprints. I will do them once for all of the work we've done in the past sprints. Right, so maybe it'll look like this. Maybe the team decides, you know what, I can update help text per sprint. And this is what it would look like. We make this transparent. We make this as our definition of done. However, the key here is that if I have things at the bottom here, it means my reality right now is that I cannot produce a potentially shippable product increment at the end of every sprint because there's additional work that needs to get done that I'm not capable of doing per sprint. I just can't do it. And that's my reality as a team or as an organization. And that's perfectly okay. We have to start with our current reality. However, it cannot be static. We have to improve. So we start with our current reality and we say, right now, we are incapable of producing a product increment at the end of the sprint, because when we finish the sprint, if we like it and we want to ship it, we still have to go through these activities at the bottom. And this might take a week, this might take 2 weeks, this might take a month. It's going to depend on your context. However, we will use our retrospectives to regularly improve. Right? What does that mean? It means as a team, we will pick one of these items and say, which ones do we want to improve on? And we will slowly work on moving them up so that we can do them within the sprint. Right? This is going to take time. And maybe every 2 months or 3 months, we take this into our retrospective and we pick an item and we start working on having it within the sprint. And we slowly keep getting better and better until eventually we have nothing down in the release column. Now we have a team that is capable of delivering a product increment at the end of every sprint, because they've leveled up their technical skills, and now all of these activities can happen within the sprint itself. There are teams out there that push things even further and have everything up at the per product backlog item level. If you get there, that's great, but we don't need to get there within Scrum. As long as we can do it once per sprint, that's more than enough. All right, so that's how we're going to use our definition of done to get better at this. I have a definition of done canvas that helps us in our retrospectives. It's exactly what I went over, except we have a spot for the item we currently want to work on, so that we can make that transparent and say, here's what we're currently working on as a team to get better at, so that we can take out all these items in the undone column and move them into the sprint. All right, few more things to cover. Dojos, all right? This is gonna be a bit technical, but dojos are daily learning, daily dedicated learning hours. All right, so 1 hour per day, we're gonna run a dedicated session to reinforce what we learned in training. Why? Because it's gonna be very hard to take practices you just learned and apply them to your code base, your production code base. It's very hard when you first start. So we need to warm up to that. And we do that in a safe environment by doing dedicated learning hours, building up those skills so that we're ready for the future. We're ready to apply these in production, in our real code base. All right. So right after training, we have to keep practicing so that these techniques sink in. We have to ensure we have sprint goals. Many teams get into a sprint and they don't define a sprint goal. Every sprint should have a sprint goal that results in a product increment that brings us closer to a product goal. All right, I'm going to repeat. Every sprint should have a sprint goal that delivers a product increment that gets us closer to our overall product goal. And that's how we build stuff, iteratively and incrementally. We will slowly get to our overall product goals. All right? This comes straight from the Scrum Guide. All right? We should be working on a cohesive set of items. And we are working collaboratively on them, not on random things not related to each other, and having each team member in their own little silo, not collaborating with their teammates. Setting sprint goals gets us there. It changes how we're breaking up our work. It also changes how the team is collaborating together. Once we have our goals, we can now start doing mob programming or ensemble programming. All right? This is going to be mandatory, 2 hours per day. And this is the entire team but we're working now not in a safe environment. We're working on our production code base, our real code base. It is going to be okay because we have the entire team, so there's going to be less chances of messing things up. And ideally, in sprint planning, we would pick an item that's a vertical slice of end-to-end functionality. And because we're tackling it all together as a team, we should be able to complete it without handoffs because we have all of the necessary skills there to be able to do that. Again, we're going to have transfer of knowledge. We're going to level up the skills, and people are going to see what others are doing and how we can build pieces of functionality that actually deliver value. We're still going to do pairing. Pairing, however, will be voluntary. Typically in sprint planning, we are going to encourage people to pick what stories are going to be good candidates for pairing, and we want to mix the experience level. Somebody that knows one domain better than somebody else, or somebody that knows one technology better than somebody else, or somebody that just joined the team and somebody that's been with the team for a long time. So we want to mix the experience level so that we get that knowledge sharing going on. All right, and finally, for getting better at CI/CD, this is interesting because now we have this notion of DevOps and a DevOps team. And the intent behind that was to bring programmers and operation folks together, right? Initially, Agile brought developers and business together, but operations was kind of left behind. So DevOps popped up to bring programmers and operations folks together. So now we have business, programmers, and operations all working as one. However, what ended up happening is we have this notion of a DevOps team, which created a new silo. We have programmers now that do a handoff to the DevOps team. What we want to do is empower the Scrum team itself to have the DevOps skills that are necessary. So we want to bring the expertise in, not hand it off to somebody else to do it for us. All right. So again, we're going to do that by pairing, rotating team members, and we'll tackle these one time per sprints, right? We'll slowly build out the knowledge and the expertise of our team members so that they can own their own pipelines, and I don't need to rely on somebody else in the organization to do that. All right, and that's the initial intent of DevOps, which is operations and developers working together, not separately. All right, so this is the 8 steps. All right, right after training, we are going to be applying these technical practices. 1 hour of dojo, 2 hours of ensemble programming, voluntary pairing. Generally, we're not going to do these on planning days and review and retro days. So that's going to be 4 days per week. All right, 4 days per week, we're going to have the schedule. And maybe we'll do that for the first sprint, or maybe for the first 2 sprints. And then we'll start bringing that down. All right, we'll bring it down to 3 days per week. Then we're going to bring it down to 2 days per week. The daily dojo, I would not get rid of it. I would maybe bring it down to just maybe once per week or once per sprint. The ensemble programming moves from mandatory to voluntary. By then, the team already understands when they should be working together and when they shouldn't, and what product backlog item is suitable for doing ensemble or not. So it's up to them to make that decision. The same way, it's up to them to decide when do they want to pair, when do they not want to pair. All right. So that's the transition, and again, that's basically that's what the blue line going down is showing. You know, that initially we're going to be spending 4 days a week on these activities that are going to help build these skill sets. Then it's going to go down to 3 days, then 2 days, And eventually we will settle down and we'll just work on regular continuous improvement action items from our retrospectives. All right, now a couple of references for you. 2 books. Accelerate talks about how these technical practices directly impact business outcomes. It's no longer this techie talk. There's a direct tie-in between organizations that apply these practices and the business outcomes that result from that, the success they're having from a business perspective. And then the Salman method is talks a lot about the practices that I just mentioned. All of these are termed technical coaching, referred to as the Salman method. So 2 great resources to kind of dig deeper on what I covered here today. I collaborate with Project Brilliant to run Agile engineering classes. So if you're interested, Project Brilliant offers discounts. You can use the Agile Indie discount code for that. But that's all I have, and I'm going to open it up for questions here. Here's my contact info. Again, I'd love it if we connect and keep chatting, but that is it. I'm going to pause right now and just open it up for any questions.
If you've got questions, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I don't have a question. I did look up the certified training in Project Brilliance was the first one that came back on Google, so that was cool. But it looks like very hard work and dedication by the teams to be able to do that. So which takes dedication from management as well.
Exactly. That's why I highlighted the developer focus. There's this unrealistic expectation that they're just going to be building, and if you're just going to be building, you're never going to improve, right? You have to, especially after the training, you have to put in that time for those practices to sink in. And like I said, it's 2 sprints initially, then these go down, and you're going to be investing about the initial 2 sprints after training, and then slowly these will go down to 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. And then the results you're going to get will speak for themselves. I mean, that's the idea here. And again, that's why I highlighted the other book, Accelerate, because that one ties, right, from a business perspective. It makes the business argument that the companies that are doing these practices, here are the business results that they are getting, which helps, helps with that argument, if we want to call it that.
Just a comment, as also a trainer, although on the Scrum side, not on the engineering practices side. My experience is that developers don't want to not do training. It's just that if they have to choose, they will choose C++ or Python or something technical. But being in Agile training, almost to a 1, they love it. They love seeing the results. They love working together as a team. They love the teamwork aspects of Agile.
Exactly, right. That's why I said, like, as a technologist, you are, you want to learn about new tech, and if you're going to get the chance to go to training, you want to learn about new tech. And it's ironic because this whole movement started from technologists and started from programmers, and somehow it got taken over. And some programmers now love it. Some programmers just hate it. They feel like they're being abused by this process.
In some cases, they are being abused by bad process, not by Agile, but by bad Agile.
bad implementations, if you want to call it that. Yeah.
Yeah, Agile by name, yeah, Agile in name only.
Hey, Fadi, you open the question up. So this was around developers and what software development was all about. But Agile's grown, and there are people who are trying to work in an Agile way that aren't doing pure software development. In your experience, have you seen parallel types of ways to implement frameworks or practices for non-software development teams that could gain the same kind of experience or the same kind of success that a software development team gains when they follow a program like this?
Yeah, the best example I can give you is Wikispeed. I don't know if you've heard about Wikispeed, but it involves manufacturing and particularly car manufacturing. And they apply these same concepts on building cars, right? So if you Google that, you kind of see how they're building car prototypes in 2 weeks, and they're regularly applying similar concept to test-driven development, and then validating that it works, and they're shifting the notion of quality, quality from the beginning. I'm not going to build something and then test it out later. I'm building something quality in. So you'll see some of those. Obviously, it's not going to be one-to-one because these practices are focused on software, but you'll see an adaptation of those practices in non-software fields.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Other questions, comments?
I have a question. So I know you said if it's not iterative, or if it's not, if it's only done once, it's not iterative. But are there instances where you would suggest a Kanban approach versus a Scrum approach for different types of maybe product
I do.
Teams?
My perspective is if you can lay out a vision, and you can say here's where we're heading, and then break that out into a roadmap where we're going to have goals moving forward, then Scrum works perfectly in that setting. If you are in a setting where the work I get is kind of random, not because of a lack of planning, just because of the nature of the work, then Kanban would be a better fit, because I can't sit and say, here's what I want to do for the next 3 months. Right? I can't put a goal in place because the type of work that I get just shifts every day. And I'm making the distinction. It shifts every day because we can't, not it shifts every day because we are not planning. Because a lot of people don't plan and they just randomly pick up work, where that's not good. You should be able to focus, plan, put a roadmap in place, and things like that. So that's my perspective. So things like things like support, a lot of infrastructure needs, that fits a lot better with Kanban than with Scrum, and being able to do that. And those we build once, right? You're not going to go over them again and again. It's just you need to get it done. When you're in product development, that's when you're going to iterate over and over again. Not only from the coding perspective, by the way, it'll also be from the refinement perspective. This is something I see a lot, which is teams write a user story and then it's handed over. And we do the user story once. We write it and then we hand it over to somebody else to implement it. It's not the point. The point is supposed to be collaborative. And we're supposed to go over it again and again and again as it's moving up the product backlog. So even writing the user story is supposed to be an iterative process. It's supposed to emerge, and we progressively elaborate on it over time, not write it once and then toss it over for somebody to implement. Right? So it's not just on the building, but it's also on the requirements part. We're supposed to be doing that iteratively as well. Okay. Cool. Was that Raul? I'm glad that helped.
Fadi, I have a question for you. I recently saw a webinar from Joe Justice of Wikispeed, as you had mentioned.
Yep, there you go.
One of the very key things one of the key takeaways I got from that message was parallelizing tasks. Now, do you have any thoughts on taking a story and parallelizing those tasks so that even though part of the team may be pairing or mobbing, but splitting up those activities in the story so the story can get done faster? Any thoughts on parallelizing those tasks?
Yeah. There's going to be a trade-off here. One thing I like to see, and I always say this, let's say you have a 6-member team, and on day 1 of the sprint, you have 6 things in progress. That's a big red flag to me, because that tells me there's 0 collaboration going on. We have 6 people in their own little world doing their own little thing, right? I would much rather see 1 or 2 things moving and actually getting finished, rather than 6 things getting started and then reaching the end of the sprint and having none of them finished. So that's the trade-off that you're doing here. So the answer is, it depends on the size of your team. I would like to see things running in parallel, but I don't like to see them one person working on one thing. Right.
Yeah.
And
the parallelization that I was talking about is on the same story. So let's say we don't have 6 stories in progress, but we have 1 story in progress. We know that we've got all these different activities to do. I think you would probably still recommend focusing on a smaller amount of those activities to get those done for that story.
Yep. And again, the idea behind pairing here is that and this is going to differ. I'm just talking right now in software. You want to break down the silos. If you keep the parallelization, you're always going to have the one person do the one thing, and you're going to make the gaps a bigger problem, right? So you want to spread that knowledge so that you're not relying on that one person.
Right.
So I'm all for that, but as long as it's not one person doing one thing, you want to be pairing people together all the time.
Perfect. Yep. Okay. Got it.
Cool. Awesome. All right, folks, we're almost nearing 7:15 here, 7:20. Maybe one more question and we'll wrap it up. If anybody has any more.
Fadi, I'll just say you were singing from my songbook, because I love the focus on XP. That's something that I came to a point in my journey a couple of years ago where I kind of asked myself, can you do Scrum without doing XP? And I kind of came to the conclusion that you can't successfully, right? You can't do Scrum successfully without doing XP, and I think that's something that a lot of Scrum Masters miss, honestly, when they're focusing on what to coach the teams on and things. So I love the idea of everybody bringing the focus back to XP. I think that's super important. So I love that you're focused on that. Your class sounds super exciting. So
I would caveat that with in software.
Right, and software, right? So thanks for that. Hopefully everybody learned something new. Scott, you want to wrap us up? There's no after party drinks, right? We're still virtual.
Have your own.
Have your own.
All right. Hopefully next year I'll be able to be there in person.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it, Fadi. Thank you so much. And we will get this posted on our YouTube channel. And again, just feel free to visit our website to stay in touch with our future meetings. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. I'll get those posted as well.
Not at all.